Hello everyone, Leah here, and in today's video we are going to be painting an impressionistic floral still life painting. First up, I just want to let you guys know that the photo that I am using as my reference image I found off of Unsplash, and I'm going to supply the cropped version as well as a black and white version of it through the link in the description section below. I'll go over the reasoning why I created the two versions for you when we start getting into the actual step-by-step portion of today's tutorial. Also, just keep in mind, I am painting on an 8x10 canvas board for today's video, but you can paint on anything that you want. So you can paint on an actual board, on a piece of paper, but I'm doing it on an 8x10 canvas. Now, this part is where it's going to come down to your own personal preference. You can do your own colors if you like, but what I'm going to be using for creating the colors today are going to be a bright magenta, a Naphthol red light, and the reasoning behind having the two different reds is because this Naphthol red light creates this beautiful corally color when mixed with just plain white. So I might want to have some of that as popping out here and there, where the bright magenta is, as you can see, it's going to become a actual pinky color. So, but mixing these two with a yellow or a phthalo will create those orange colors that you want to get for the colors that are supplied in the reference photo. If you only have a yellow, that's great. Hansa yellow, any kind of like primary yellow is a great yellow to have on hand. It'll be good for mixing your greens as well as doing the orange coral colors. But I favor this phthalo color from Charvin just because I really love its colors, its versatility. It's just my favorite to use. So I'm going to heavily be using this one as my mixing color as well as just some solid coloring in here. I'm also going to use some green. Convenience colors are the best when you want to make things simple and just be loose with what you're doing and not have to worry about things. So I'm going to use the olive green, and to make some darker colors I'm going to be using French blue from Charvin. If you don't have this exact same color, you can use something like a phthalo blue or a Prussian blue. Those kind of darker blues will be great for mixing those colors. And the last thing I want to go over is the paintbrush. So let me just put this board down. I'm holding the color mixing chart that I have in my other hand. Now, I'm going to suggest that you pick one paintbrush and use just the one. Keep it simple, and when you're doing impressionistic abstract work, by limiting yourself to one paintbrush, especially one that's a little bit larger, you can really be more it's the way you lay the colors down. You can be more loose with it, so less focused on the details, and that's what we want to focus on today. If you do want to have one of these smaller size brushes on hand for near the end when you're doing the detailing, that's great. I'm just going to be focusing on using a large brush. I recommend going with something that's going to be an 8 or a 12. Now, I favor flat brushes, but if you have a filbert or a round, that's perfectly fine as well. Now let's get into creating today's painting. This is my typical setup for when I do a painting. So I have my canvas set up, I have an area where I do color swatching and where I clean my brushes. Now, something that's really important when doing any kind of painting is to have a cleaning section and to have a spare towel or paper towel that you can wipe excess paint off of and one that you can dry it on. Now, I really like having a sketchbook where I can test down colors and see how they look prior to maybe laying them down on top of other colors. So the first thing that I am going to do for today's painting is put down a base layer. I've learned from experience where it's actually so much easier to figure out what your highlights and your shadows are when you have a base layer to start. So a color that's going to be your undertone. Right now I'm using my phthalo color, and what I've done is I've just watered it down a little, and I'm painting a very thin layer. We don't really want this to be thick, and we don't want it to be too wet. We want it to dry quickly, so by going about this way, it's really good. If you wanted to, and you want your still life to be kind of like floating in the background, you can create your entire backdrop right now. Paint in your background, the colors that you want, any shadows, textures, or anything like that before you get started. This is where you can kind of be really loose with it as well, drape colors down, do whatever you want. But I chose to go with the warm tone to match with the warm flowers. And the next thing that I recommend is having the still life photo near you while you're doing it. So I'm going to just pin it next to the canvas so I can see what I'm doing on the actual canvas itself. And I want to first map out where I'm going to put things. And I'm just using some of the magenta right now with a little bit of white to give it that pink pop of a color. And what's great about doing impressionistic, abstract-based still life paintings is that you can be really exaggerate, you know what, whatever. You can exaggerate your shapes, you can exaggerate the sizing of things. So as you can see from the reference image, the jar that it's in is fairly large and the flowers have a good contrast to it, but what I'm going to be doing is making the jar smaller and the flowers more pronounced. That's my goal at this point in time. And right now I'm just trying to figure out where I want to place those flowers on the canvas. And you don't want to put in details. You just want to kind of map out how big is this flower going to be? What direction is it pointing in? Is it small? Is it large? Does it have really big petals sticking out from it? But you want to be very loose. Make it more like a shape. As you can see, my flowers aren't perfectly round. The shapes that I'm putting down are more blocky. I find doing this makes it more impressionistic, more loose when I'm actually working on the final piece of it, when I'm putting all the layers down and creating my flowers. And even though there aren't a lot of leaves and greenery in this painting, I'm going to add quite a few. I really like that mix of flowers and greenery, or I like to call it foliage, and I know people make fun of me for that, but I don't care. So I'm going to do that. And then the last thing is putting the stems in. And when it comes to stems and glass, it can be a little tricky, but don't worry guys. We'll go over that later on in the video. Right now, I'm just grabbing some of my darker colors. So I mixed some of the Naphthol and the magenta together to create this dark red color, and I'm putting it in where the shadowed areas are. Now, I have a tip here when it comes to being really loose with this. And as you're doing your layers, mixing some white, mixing some colors, putting in your dark shadows and brightness, some people would say to squint your eyes and just see where the shapes generally are, because we don't want to go detail oriented with this. But if you have glasses like me, take them off. I'm serious. Paint without your glasses on, especially at the beginning stages of trying to work through being loose. I find frequently that when I'm trying to be loose, I'm trying to just do the highlights and the shadows and be more impressionistic with something, that I actually end up being really more detail oriented. But if I take my glasses off for a little bit and I look at what I'm supposed to be doing and I paint it without them, that's when the shapes take form and when I feel looser. It helps me get back into the flow of things. So if you don't wear glasses, you can squint, but if you do have glasses, take them off. At this stage, I'm starting to lighten up my mixes. So I'm adding more white into it and getting some of the brighter areas. I'm still not focusing on the brightest spots, but I am filling in that space because what I want to do is build layer upon layer when it comes to this. And this is kind of where that black and white photo might come in handy for some of you, especially if you're not going to do these colors. Sometimes when you're first trying something new, looking at a photo with the colors in it can be really distracting because you're now focusing more on what is the color of that highlight, what is the color of that shadow, when really you should just be focusing on how dark it is or how light it is, and then mixing your colors according to what your preferences are. So use the black and white edited version for you. If you find that while you're doing your painting, you find that you're being too detail oriented into what the color should be. Or if you are using a different color. So if you decided you don't want to paint your roses in these orangey coral colors and you want to make your roses pink or even blue, I suggest using the black and white version because that'll help you separate the colors from the colors that you're using. I'll admit right now that when it came to painting this large rose in the back, the one that's really bright, while I'm creating it, I struggled with it. And I do paintings like this frequently, but I felt like I couldn't get the light tones the way I wanted them and the shapes that I thought it should be. And so it's okay if you are working through this and you're building up your layers and you're doing everything and you're going, you know what, that's not right. I don't feel like this is working. Or you start focusing in on something, really fine-tuning it and getting really detail oriented. My suggestion for that is if you find yourself getting pulled in that direction, to switch it up a little. So either take a step back from your painting and dance to a song for 2 minutes, or take your dog out for, a little break outside or something like that. Or switch to the next thing that you could be painting and go to the greenery, go to your background if you haven't painted it in yet. Start working on the glass vase or creating a solid colored vase. You'll find that while I'm working on the glass area later on in the video, that I get really detail oriented into it and I get so focused in on it that I have to constantly remind myself, no, take a step back. Let's look at something else. But before we get into that, I'm going to put in some greenery. I'm going to try to get some color to help these flowers pop some more, just so I can see some darker areas, because these flowers aren't super dark, but I want to add some contrast to the image that I'm painting to help me see where my shadows and my light should be, and to get some base layers down for these stems that are going to be in the glass vase. You know what? I'm just going to switch between the two because I never know which one to say. At this point, I just want to also let you guys know that I'm just using the olive green straight from the tube. I'm not mixing in any colors to make it darker right now or to lighten it up. It's just the green. I also recognize that what I see while I'm painting and what you might see on your screen might not match up to the exact same colors, just because of the computer screens, the lighting in the room, how it got recorded, and different factors like that. So if you want to kind of mimic the same colors that I'm doing while you're doing your color mixing, go with what feels right for you. If the green isn't looking like you can see it on screen, and maybe it's more vibrant and you don't like that, maybe add in a little bit of the blue to darken it with a touch of the red. It'll make it a little bit darker, but if you want to lighten it up or you like it the way it is, you know, that's great as well. And because we are adding in flowers, you can just really be random about it. You don't have to be too precise. Okay, so I'm getting into the background colors for me now. And what I did for this color, I'll let you know that I mixed it randomly. So I added some green, some blue, some of the magenta, and some white. I really just kept mixing until I got this browny purple color. And I went kind of with that neutral tone because I want these flowers to pop. And I have a little bit of the purple in it just to offset some of the color that's going to pop through, which is kind of this yellowy orangey color. And on the color wheel, purple, yellowy colors, they are complementary colors to each other, and I find that they work really well in paintings as they are complementary. And so having that slight tint to it really helps, I think, in the painting in the long run when I'm done, when you look at the final piece. And at this point, you also want to go in and fill in any spaces. Say, for example, you feel like one of your roses is just too big, or maybe it's not big enough, or you really overdid the greenery for your leaves. This is the point when you're doing your backdrop where you can kind of layer on top of it. So you can go in and paint over your greenery, be like, you know what, I'm going to make this rose bigger. So you just make sure that space has some extra space around it. You can be really, I don't want to keep saying the word loose, but I want to say actually messy with it. I think that lends to the impressionistic, sort of abstract emotion when it comes to creating something like this, because when you give your backdrop this messy look to it, it just adds to that simplicity of it. It makes it look actually more complex than it actually is. And also keep in mind when you're doing that to add some white into your background colors if you want to have some highlights and shadows. So I'm going to put a shadow eventually. I had it in my mind while I was painting to have a shadow for where the flowers are. So I needed to remember when I did the backdrop to have some of it lighter than the other half. So if you're going to do that, you can keep that in mind at this stage as well. But really just like throw that paint down. And what I love about using one paintbrush for this entire painting is that when you are trying to do maybe finer details or filling in smaller spaces, you can be that much messier with it, that more impressionistic with it, and just give an implied feeling of something. And it really lends to the overall appearance when you're done. Now that I'm also going to fill in the tabletop, I will note right now, guys, I hated my first attempt at it. Like when I finished painting it, I looked and I went, ugh, this is not what I was picturing in my head. But that's okay, because I'm going to go back over it again later on in the painting. So if you get to that stage and you're just like, ooh, what was I thinking? Just let it dry and then go back to it later. I think that's what's great about acrylics is that you can actually start working on another area while something that you don't like dries, and it might dry quite quickly, especially depending on the environment that you're in and the level of thickness of the paint that you used. So just give it some time and it'll, yeah, like, I don't know, look at this color. What was I thinking? But more importantly, for a suggestion, when you're doing your backdrop and the tabletop and you are painting the glass like I am, go in and lay some of that color down between everything, because even though we're going to layer over it with some blues and greens, and I might even put in some purples, you want to have some of that color kind of peeking through, because that's what's great about glass is that you can kind of see through everything. So that's why I'm laying those colors down in between, and making it look really messy right now. I even try to put in some blue at this stage. I was like, okay, well, I don't really like my tabletop. I think I'm gonna focus on the glass right now, just get some of the blue mixed in there. And it's kind of a muddy blue, and that's okay. You want to use the colors that you're using for your colors, if that makes sense. So let me try to like word this in a better way. When you are mixing your colors, in the end, you want to have a more harmonious painting. And by doing that, you're going to be using the same colors that you're using throughout it. So the fact that my blue is a little muddy means that it's because I mixed in some of the other colors that I'm creating with. So I have a little bit of the orange in there, the Naphthol red, things like that. It will make the overall painting in the end be more cohesive versus having, say, a blue that doesn't actually match the color tones and the vibe of the painting. I also want to point out something right now when it comes to painting glass. I'm not an expert at it. I struggle with it every time I paint glass. This is like the bane of my existence when it comes to doing still life florals, is when the flowers are in a see-through vase of some kind. But what you want to do is just focus on where are the highlights and the shadows. And you might be thinking, what shadows? Well, as you can see in the reference photo, at the bottom, you can see where the glass is thicker. So it's a little bit more of an oval shape. And then where the highlights are is where the light is shining through at a brighter spot. So at the edges of this shape. So you want to kind of like roughly map out where those areas are and put in the lights and the shadows there. And then go back to it later. So do that and then go back to the roses like I am now. And I'm putting in some just straight from the tube phthalo color to like add some layering to these dark toned areas. What I love about this color is that it's an opaque color. No, sorry, it's not opaque. It's transparent. It's semi-transparent. There we go. And when you layer it on top of things, it looks really great when they are warmer tones. I find it really goes really well. And then when you add a little bit of white to it, it gets more of a yellowy tint to it. And it really helps these colors pop. So, yellow tint tone. So at this stage, really, you just want to go in and start adding more highlights, going in and going, you know what, I didn't like how that shadow looked, and maybe adding in some more. I'll let you know that at this point, I put my glasses back on for the flowers. I decided to just like really trust my instincts. And that can be really tough, especially if this is new to you for doing this kind of painting. But allow yourself to trust your instincts. These flowers, we don't want them to be identical replications of what we're looking at. We want them to be looser. We want them to be freer. And by doing that, you can even maybe when you're laying down some of your colors, close your eyes. Allow yourself to feel how your arms are moving while you're doing it. I'm also a really firm believer in when you're doing these type of art forms, when it's more impressionistic, in letting some of your layers dry before you go in and do the next layer. It allows them to really pop through, where if you're layering upon layer and layer, when it's wet, you're going to be picking up that color underneath when you put your wet on top of wet. But if you let it dry and then start layering the colors on top, when your brush moves, when it has less paint on it, you might have some more of like dry onto dry, or you might have heavy onto dry. And it creates great texture and color popping. So yes, I recommend doing that. So that's why I'm a fan of going back and forth in between painting from the flowers to the leaves to the backdrop and back again. And like I said, I struggled a little with this big flower back here, but it's okay to just be like, well, this is a really bright area, because we don't want it to be white, because it's not pure white on the photo. So keeping your colors with a tint, that's where you're gonna probably struggle the most, but that's okay. And now that you're going in and letting things dry for the flowers, you can go in and do some more of your green mixes. Clean up the stems that are in the jar, add more green over top of the backdrop, maybe even add some white to your colors to just add some highlights to the background. Get a feel for where you want your shapes, your shadows, and everything to be. I'm just going in now with like mixing different types of light greens. So I'm adding a little bit more of, say, some, so my head just popped in there. So I decided to do the leaves without any glasses on again. And I was like, am I even painting in the right spot? And I brought my face right up to the screen. But yes, I mean, it's okay. Now, at this point with the flowers, I'm going to start putting more of those bright highlight details in. And my recommendation is, if you're going to do the one brush that I am doing and see how it's so much bigger, is to make sure you don't have too much excess paint on your brush. So in order to get those finer details, I have to like wipe the brush off a little and dip it in, so there's not a lot of paint there. But it still allows me, with a flat brush, a size 8 flat brush, to get these thin lines and details in there. And really you're just kind of getting the feel for it. Like where does the sun reach or the light touch? Where is it really bright? And this is also where you can start going in and maybe covering up some of those shadows that you're like, maybe this was too dark at the time when you put it down. So you can add in your lighter colors on top. And I'm also at this point going back in and repairing some of the areas where I'm like, well, maybe it should be a little bit different. I was like, oops, gotta cover that. Now I'm gonna go back to the glass vase again and put in those highlights. As you can see, I'm focusing where the sun is going through the glass and trying to just make that area brighter. It really brings it together. And then after that, I'm going to also put in just some solid dark blue and give my glass some more shape to it. And just some of those simplistic lines for the shadows and the highlights can really bring it to life and give it shape. As you can see, now all of a sudden it looks more like an actual vase, right? So these tiny little layers that you build up on top of one another is what's going to really help make it pop. At this point, I'm actually even adding in a little bit of a purple color. and it's really faint, but it kind of goes with how my backdrop has a slight purple tone to it, and it goes with bringing in these colors. At this stage of the painting, you should already be feeling pretty good about yourself and looking at how your flowers are taking shape. This is the point where we're now going to just go in and do some minor retouching. So I'm going to add in some brighter highlights or cover up some areas where I feel like the shadow should have been a little bit darker. You'll see that I'm adding in some of that coral pink right now because I just want it to pop in where those highlights are. So I'm adding in some fun little pops of color here and there and just repairing minor things. How do you guys feel about your painting so far? Do you feel like this is something that you really want to do for yourself and you're going to go and download it, or are you doing it right now with me and watching and doing it at the same time? Let me know in the comment section below. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about today's painting and how you either went along and did it with me, or if you went and did it during one of your me times where you're able to set some time apart for yourself. At this stage, I'm staring at my flowers and I'm feeling pretty good about them, but I am really hating this tabletop. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to make it more like a woody color. So I mixed some of the fallow and some of the reds and greens, and I kind of just mixed up this bright brown color, and I just start swiping it across to make it kind of match the reference photo, but not exactly. I'm putting in kind of a feel of it without replicating it. And as I do that, I am accidentally covering up some things like the tips of the green leaves, some areas in the jar, and I will go back and I'll fix that. But at this stage, it's okay to like do some final big moments and then go back in. I think having these multiple layers on top of each other just add to that whole impressionistic style of painting. And yes, I recognize my hands in the way. You can't really see that one brush stroke that I'm trying to really do. For that, I apologize. But really, I'm just filling in the space. And then what I'm doing is I'm dry brushing inside of the jar so that you can see some of that table color popping through the glass to give it that see-through experience. And now I'm just going over and I'm repairing anything that I feel needs to be repaired again. Alrighty guys, we are nearing the end of the video, so I just want to say thank you so much for watching today's tutorial. If you have any questions about anything that I did or the colors that I'm using, please let me know in the comments section below. And as I said earlier, I'm really curious to know if you guys decide to do this painting or not, so let me know in the comment section below as well. If you have any other types of things that you want to learn how to do, I'm curious and I will put these things together for you. So also let me know that in the comments below, or you can reach out to me on social media if you'd like. You can do that as well if you don't feel comfortable leaving a public comment. Before I sign off, I also just want to say thank you so much for watching this video. And let's take a deep breath in so we can shake off any negativity that we may have been holding in for today. So let's take a deep breath in and release that air. Once again, thank you so much, everyone. Hit that subscribe button if you're interested in this kind of content. And until next time, stay magical.